Hello everyone, Chris here and welcome to one of my videos. Thank you so much for stopping by. Today I want to talk about timesinks. Now you might be thinking to yourself, what is a timesink and what relevance does it have to gaming? Well, let me walk you through this and also why I'm making this video, because I wasn't intending to, but I kind of feel I have to. I need to get something off my chest. So, a timesink is a game that has hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of hours of content. Now, that could be a game such as Destiny or Call of Duty that has a more repetitive gameplay mechanic loop where you just do the same thing over and over, but it's fun. Or it can simply be games with lots and lots of content in it, such as Red Dead Redemption 2 or Breath of the Wild. To put it simply, any game with hundreds of hours of content is a timesink. Now, on to why I'm talking about this today. I was going to make a different video this week, but I then saw this tweet by the developers of Dying Light 2, claiming that their game would take 500 plus hours to see everything and reach full completion. Now, this tweet was phrased in such a way that it was effectively a marketing tool. It was them shouting, "Hey guys, look how big our game is. You've got tons of content to do and it will take you a long time. Yay!" Effectively. In fairness to the Dying Light developers, this is not an uncommon tactic in video games, but I will get back to that later. It bothered me, and I clearly wasn't the only one because it almost immediately backfired with practically everyone, including myself, looking at it and going, WTF? No one has that much time to put into particularly a single-player game. Almost no one has that much time on their hands to do that. Now, for some context, I want to clear something up here. I don't work due to a disability and illness. I also don't have any kids yet. So I say this to point out that I have a lot of free time. More than a lot of other adults, certainly. Honestly, probably more than most kids and teenagers too. And, as you can imagine, I spend quite a bit of that time playing games. Even I don't have 500 hours to put into a single game like that. I don't think I would want to be honest with you. I mentioned this to point out, who did they think they were advertising this to? Who did they think would look at that and go, that's for me? Now, they did backtrack on this tweet a little bit and eventually said that the main campaign would only take 20 hours, with all of the side quests, etc., like that, taking roughly a much more manageable 120 hours, which I think is perfectly acceptable. They explained that the 500-hour figure was to see everything the game had, including talking to every NPC, hearing every line of dialogue, and completing every zone. I don't think any gamer would consider that a 100% completion list. That is way too far. No, I genuinely don't think anyone would consider that to be 100% completion. Not to that extreme. And that tells me that it is exactly what I thought it was. It was a marketing tool to be able to say, look how big our game is. As I alluded to earlier, I will come back to the marketing issue thing. I do think it is an issue and I want to talk about it, but I'll get to that. Firstly, let me talk about why I have a bit of a problem with timesinks. And as a side note, I kind of want to point out that I seem to be the only person talking about this. Certainly in the context of how I'm talking about it anyway. Most other articles I could find whilst doing research for this all involved MMORPGs and online games, with the idea being that the longer you stay in the game, the more likely you are to either buy some microtransactions, or if it's like WoW, you'll keep your subscription going. I'm referring to them more on the single-player side of things, and I want to get into that. Right, my issue. Let's talk about good timesinks and bad timesinks. And I genuinely, in my opinion, do think that there is a difference, and that certain games can be put into certain categories here. Now, again, to add some context, I need to point out, I absolutely love big open world games. Like, anyone who's watched my videos knows they are my favourite type of games. I love being able to sink hundreds of hours into them. I'll put some on screen now so you can see, just from my Steam library, how often I do put hundreds of hours into games. I want to say that just so you know, I'm not just being a hater here. I'm not somebody who only ever plays like Call of Duty or Madden or something, and I don't like these big, long, single-player games. I really do. Having said that, I'm worried. And I think this increasing trend of timesinks is bad for gaming, and I think it's bad for gamers. I think it's bad for you as a gamer as well. Anyway, I mentioned different types of timesinks, both good and bad. So let's get into that. A few examples of good timesinks are Red Dead Redemption 2 and Breath of the Wild. Both have very large open world maps that are fun and exciting to explore. Mostly, examples of good timesinks have blank maps, where you have to go out and actively find these things yourself. It's fun, it's exciting, it really does, however, demand triple-digit time investment. Right, why are some in the bad category then? Let's take a bit of a closer look at Assassin's Creed Odyssey and Valhalla. Actually, when I was thinking about this video, I think most Ubisoft games can actually be thrown into this as well, such as like Watch Dogs and whatnot, but we'll focus on those two. Both have very large open world maps, much like Red Dead Redemption 2 and Breath of the Wild, and both do demand many, many hours, upwards of hundreds of hours, to complete everything. So why do I put them in the bad category? I consider them a bad time sink because for the most part, you just go from one marker to the next marker, and all you do at that marker is what you did at the last marker and all the other markers before that. It's extremely repetitive and, frankly, kind of boring most of the time. I adored both games. However, both games truly burnt me out while I was coming towards the end of their storyline. It took me a while before I actually was able to figure out what really truly bothered me about both games and why I got the burnout I did on those, but not on some other games. What I worked out was that games such as Red Dead Redemption 2 and Breath of the Wild are big because they need to be big. They had a lot of content, the developers had a lot of ideas of what you could do, so they needed large maps and a large world for you to be able to explore that freely. Assassin's Creed, on the other hand, is big simply because they shoved a load of content in, making it feel bloated and unnecessarily large. This is content simply for the sake of having the content in there, effectively giving the game fake longevity and stretching it out way more than it necessarily needed to be. Now, other than being a little bit disingenuous on behalf of the publishers and the developers, this trend is also frustrating for gamers because it causes unnecessary burnout in games that are otherwise very, very good. I loved Assassin's Creed Valhalla in particular. I still got burnt out before completing every aspect of it though, because I just felt done. It's not new though. It's happened many times before in the history of gaming. With the most recent one, I'm calling the map size war, or my map is bigger than your map. For years during the 7th generation of consoles, developers rushed to have the largest in-game world they could possibly have. These days, if your game is an open world game, having a large map is a given. But back at the beginning of the 7th generation of consoles, the fact that you had a large map, and actually its square mileage, was a selling point, so much so that you even shoved it on the box art sometime. As with the bloated, content-filled games of today, this just led to games that certainly had huge maps, but these maps felt empty and lifeless, and actually Just Cause 3 is the epitome of this trend that I can think of anyway. It had, for the time, an enormous in-game world with practically nothing to do outside of the main mission areas. And it kind of looked really bland as well. The entire island was just the same, practically, with a few little areas that looked a little different. It was boring. Eventually, gamers pushed back against this trend, and it forced developers to rein it in a little bit, and they started making smaller maps with much more detail and much more life to them. These days, maps are huge again, a lot of them bigger than they were at the peak of this trend, but they are filled with life and stuff to do. And you can probably see where I'm going here, because this then leads directly to my game has more content than your game. The map size war is intrinsically linked to time sinks, and the issue I feel we're facing today as gamers. Right, that's what time sinks are, the difference I feel between good and bad ones, and a quick and very simplified history of how this all came to be. I think this trend is coming to an end though. The immediate backlash and pushback against that 500-hour tweet shows me that gamers are getting sick of this, and they're starting to notice. I think they're also getting sick of the constant push to add useless content to games that simply don't need it. I would like to add as an aside here as well, I'm specifically not including games like, say, Minecraft or Kerbal Space Program, because even though they are technically large open world games, they kind of sit in their own place in the pantheon of genres. You know, you make your own fun. You create your own content rather than the developers doing it for you. Or, as my non-gamer wife put it, they have user-defined completion. So I believe they don't fit into either good or bad. That's why I'm not talking about those, if you were wondering. Moving on though. This rush to add more and more content to games. It's awesome when it works, and it creates some of the best games that have ever been made. But all too often, it simply leads to bloated, repetitive games that cause enormous amounts of burnout in the gamers that are playing it. And why? So marketing people who only care about sales can add a bigger number to their spreadsheet. The pushback, though, has already begun. I'm calling on you all, as fellow gamers, to notice this trend, to understand the marketing reason behind it, and frankly, to call it out when you see it. Because I don't think it's acceptable. I think it is making otherwise brilliant games cause burnout and to be judged more poorly and harshly than they should be. And frankly, I can imagine it's causing burnout on the developers to have to add all this unnecessary content to their games simply so it can be marketed in a certain way. Anyway, that was my rant. Thank you for listening if you've got this far. I really appreciate it. My rant is over now, and I do feel better for getting that off my chest, actually, because it was really bothering me when I saw that tweet, and I'm going to assume by all the pushback it bothered a lot of other people as well. Thank you so much for watching. I really, really do appreciate it. Hopefully you found this video informative, or maybe even a little entertaining. I appreciate you watching. Thank you so much. I will catch you next time when I make my proper video next week. I'll see you later. Goodbye.